I am really excited to introduce Dr. Ann Wong. She is a professor in the Department of Anesthesia here at McMaster University. She's the director of the FHS Academic Leadership Program. And she is actually my predecessor for the faculty development program here at McMaster. So without further ado, Dr. Wong.
Thank you so much for that really kind introduction, Teresa. And before we start, however, I would like to give a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that McMaster University sits on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations within the lands bounded by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. So I just want to declare that I don't have any conflicts to declare, except that, I am a director of the Faculty of Health Sciences Academic Leadership Program, McMaster. So I'd like to give you a little bit of context as to why I named this workshop Leadership 101, Leading Self and Others. So the reason I named it Leadership 101 and why I'm thrilled to be here presenting this workshop is that I find the topic of leadership really fascinating, not only from a theoretical and scholarly perspective, but also because of its relevance for all of us in daily life. And I think this quote exemplifies that. Leadership is one of the few professions in which everything you learn to be a leader makes you a better person. Everything you learn to be a better person helps you to become a better leader. So in many ways, I see leadership skills as being life skills. So that's why I think leadership is quite relevant to all of us. And I hope I can convince you of that as we go through the workshop. With regard to the second part of the title, Leading Self and Others, I think the first part really reflects what I think is at the heart of leadership, and that is you first need to be able to lead yourself before you can lead others. So in other words, you need to know who you are, why you want to lead, and what your strengths and values are. Because all of these, whether you're conscious or not, will shape how you go through your leadership. They drive your leadership.
So at this point, a poll was launched, and I've actually put all of those poll questions into the PowerPoint slides in front of you, and you can take some time and stop and pause and discuss these questions with your group. This is to replicate the actual activity that we would have had in the workshop. So it's kind of like Dora the Explorer for adults. Please take the time to interact with us in this way, even though you can't be here at the workshop. So go ahead and pause the video right now, and then think about those questions. Write down your answers, and then when we return to regular programming, it'll be Dr. Wong taking up the answers. And remember, for this activity, there are no right answers. There are just answers from the crowd and from yourself. When you're done, just hit play and then see what the other participants said.
All right, so let's quickly go over the first question. So the statement is, effective leaders take charge of situations. And 57% of you say yes, 20% say no, and 23% are uncertain. So that's interesting. Maybe we could have, if someone isn't too shy, maybe explain why you answered the way you answered.
Yeah, or you can type it and I can read it for the record. That's fine as well. If you're feeling shy, don't worry about it so much. I can be your surrogate.
Can I participate?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Abdurrahman from Mac.
Hi, how are you doing, Abdurrahman?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this. So I think this is one of the difference between leader and manager. And manager, he's the one who is taking in charge of the situation, and leadership is not a must, or it's not a role of a leader.
Interesting. So, so you answered no or uncertain to this question?
I answered no.
Interesting. Okay.
Cool.
Anybody else?
Any other thoughts? Maybe someone that said yes or uncertain.
I said yes. Can I give my
Yeah.
My name is Sylvia Alvarez. I'm from the Peds Cardiology Division.
Yeah, great.
I said yes because I guess I saw it a little bit differently than he did. I think that leaders do take charge of the situation, even if it's to encourage someone else to resolve it. But I do think that leaders do take charge in that sense too, even if it's to delegate to someone.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
Looks like Allison typed a comment. I put uncertain because I wasn't sure that what take charge meant. It seemed to be a negative connotation when I first read the statement.
Okay, well, this is great. We've got some representatives from the 3 different answers.
Yeah,
that's
great.
fantastic. Yeah, so I want to say, there's no right answer. I think it's really, the whole point of it is to illustrate that people have different views on leadership and this whole sort of sentence. For me personally, and what I'm going to talk about or refer to in this workshop, is I would only say yes to this sentence if it were modified. And how I would modify it is, effective leaders know when to take charge of situations. So that's how I would actually rephrase it. They know when. So that big question, that when. So they know when to take charge and they know when not to take charge. Okay, next question. Your abilities determine whether you become a leader or not. Interestingly, a lot of people, 51% said no. 31% yes, and there's 17% that's certain. So can somebody talk about why they chose the answer they did? How about someone from the no?
So this is Maxine Lewis.
Yes.
I put no, and I'm actually changing my mind now.
Okay.
I put no because I'm thinking that there's lots of reasons why someone wouldn't become a leader even though they have the appropriate abilities. It might be circumstances, personal choice, etc. But I'm also thinking that everybody is a leader in some way. Whether you have a leadership position or not doesn't actually mean that it doesn't negate you being a leader. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
A couple people typing in as well. So Dylan Roman is saying I chose no because this is what we've been told, but I do still believe that you have to have a gift or skills of leadership. Emma has said I think this could be limiting. I think anyone can be a leader if they want to. Allison said no because I have the ability, but not to be in the right environment to lead. So sometimes you don't have the abilities, but maybe it's not the right time or place.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff has said that I think leadership can be a learned skill. Yep. Kristen said that there's a variety of factors that shape a leader, and some are probably innate and some are probably learned. So Christy says some really good stuff too. No, as leadership is more than just abilities.
Yeah. Okay. And actually that sort of summarizes the point I want to make, that yes, abilities is one factor that may determine whether you become a leader or not, but there's many other factors, and we'll be discussing that. And some people who actually say that, in fact, there is a myth of meritocracy. So we have this thing that, it doesn't matter, what you look like, or it doesn't matter where you come from, or who you know. It's all about your abilities, your skills. Are you able to do the job? We know that there are actually a lot of things that play into whether you become recognized as a leader or not, that go beyond your abilities. So we're going to be discussing some of that in our workshop. So thank you, everyone, for that. And then finally, number 3. Okay, interesting. We have a lot of leaders in this group. I see myself as leader. 77%, 3% say no, and 20% say uncertain. So that's very interesting. So this last question, I want to talk about it a little bit. Why is it that you feel that you're a leader? I hope that at the end of this workshop, that in fact this will inspire you to continue developing as a leader. For those of you who said no, I want you to consider why not. No or uncertain. I wanted for you to reflect on why is it that you either may not see yourself as leader or you're uncertain. What's holding you back? And I want you to consider, is it possible that how you conceptualize what a leader is may be part of the reason why you answered the way you did. So that's not just something to think about. The other thing I want to make a distinction about as we go through this workshop is I'd like to make a distinction between the word leader and the word leadership. So oftentimes when we think about leader, we think about someone with a designated role. On the other hand, the word leadership has to do with the process or the qualities of a leader. So I do make the distinction between the two. And while I'll be talking about the two, I'll be mostly focusing on the idea of leadership. and the fact that all of us, even if we do not have a designated role or title, we can all contribute to leadership. And this is particularly relevant during the COVID pandemic. Not all of us have designated roles, but we can all be leaders by contributing to leadership in our own spheres. So that's another thing that I want to sort of bring out in this workshop. So the focus of this workshop is mostly about developing your mindset as a leader and contributing to leadership, as opposed to talking about leadership from a designated role perspective, although I'll be talking about both. So I have 4 take-home messages that come from, and premises that come from this workshop. So first of all, one core message I wanted to impart upon you is that leadership starts first with the desire to make a difference. The second premise is leadership is about knowing self. And I really like this quote because it just points out to us how difficult and simple the whole idea of leadership is. So being a leader is synonymous with being yourself. It's precisely that simple, and it's also that difficult. It's difficult because a lot of us don't actually take the time to really examine ourselves. And leadership is about leading self. So knowing who you are, where you're going, and where you came from. So leadership premise number 3, leadership is about leading self. And then finally, leadership starts with believing in yourself, believing that you have something positive to contribute, that you can make a difference, and that you matter. So that's another leadership premise that I'd like you to walk away from the workshop with. If you look at the literature, there's lots of literature out there that really emphasizes these 4 concepts, these 4 premises. So Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner are really internationally well-known authors and researchers on the idea of leadership. And these are some of their books, and they really emphasize this concept of knowing yourself, leading yourself. And certainly, if we look at one of the most popular frameworks that we use in healthcare leadership, the LEADS framework, the LEADS acronym starts with leading self. So I just want to emphasize that. That's why I decided to focus on this concept. Okay, so the first part of this workshop will be more theoretical, and then the second part will be interactive. Okay, so I'm going to start off with what is a leader. I sent out some definitions just to help, just examples of definitions of leader or leadership, just so that it will give you a bit of a stimulus. If you can think about when someone tells you or says the word leader or leadership, what comes into your mind? What do you think of? If you can take a few minutes as to which definition resonates with your concept of leadership.
So at this point, Dr. Wong provides a list of various leadership definitions that she has the group review and then discuss. So please take a look at the list of quotes around leadership that you could review. Once again, you can stop and pause the recording at this point so that you can look through the list. Then, when you're ready, press play again.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see which ones really come up repeatedly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks like 6 is kind of popular. 13 is popular.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's a wide range. Lots of people have different thoughts. So
Yeah, different
that's
thoughts.
great. 4 has come up a couple of times. 6 really kind of keeps coming back.
Okay, 4, 6, 11, you see, as being popular. 13.
4, 6, 10, 11.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
those are probably the big ones.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly give a chance for people to explain if they have other, if we haven't captured it. Okay. All right. So just keep on. I know that not everyone's had a chance to finish, but we'll, I think we've got a few to go on. Okay. So 4 says leadership defines what the future should look like, aligns people with that vision, and inspires them to make it happen despite the obstacles. So that one is very popular with people. Leadership is the ability, number 6, is to inspire confidence and support amongst people. Interesting. 11, it's better to lead from behind and to put others in front, especially when you celebrate victory, when nice things occur. You take the front line when there's danger, then people will appreciate your leadership. So we've got quite a wide variety. Does anyone want to explain their why one or the other resonates with them?
Can I comment on number 5?
Yes, of course.
I really like number 5 because sometimes people misunderstood what leadership. They think that leadership is just to abuse people to finish your project or the project. But I think here they meant that as a part of your leadership, you need to know the skills that everyone in your team and try to emerge them to work in the project, so everyone will have high input in the project rather than just abusing them for your own benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I really like in number 5.
Yeah. So harnessing others' abilities.
All right, we have one on the chat as well. So it's interesting because different styles of leadership will be more or less effective in different situations.
Yeah.
And this is from Sarah Lal, who says she teaches in entrepreneurship. And so her choices are 2 and 9, which reflects kind of like a different set of skills, I think, in that zone.
Yeah. So the idea in 2 about being self-reliant, and in 9 is leading by example.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And 13 is also seems to be popular. If your actions inspire others to dream more, do more, learn more, do more, and become more, you're a leader. So that's anybody else want to say something about their choice?
Yeah, there's Lisa is saying in the chat, for me, distinguishing the feature of 4 is despite the obstacles. So that's an important kind of key phrase that Lisa's pointing out. And then Tanya is pointing out that it depends on the situation. Sometimes you need to lead by example. Sometimes it is just by giving people the encouragement to do better.
Okay, that's really great. You're bringing up a lot of issues actually that I'll be actually going over, so that's fantastic. So this definition did not appear on your list. However, one can say that this is the most simple definition of a leader. So a leader is someone with followers, and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's actually deceptively insightful. What this definition points out is a leader cannot be a leader in isolation. That in fact, a leader is only a leader if someone wants to follow them, if they're only recognized as such. So the idea is actually, it's not all about the leader, it's also about the follower. So I think that concept is important to start the discussion about what leadership is. And it brings up the idea that, the sort of common sense idea of leader coming into a lot of our minds is someone who's just taking charge and just leading the fore. However, this idea of looking at who is allowing the leader to be a leader, the followers, also brings up the idea of leadership as leading from behind. And if you look at your definitions, it sort of reflects that spectrum from focusing on the leader to the follower and to the context. And in fact, if you look with regard to the basic components, this is quite an interesting and useful framework to look at what are the components that make up the whole process of leadership. So leadership, you can say, if you break it down, can be conceptualized as a process that involves leader or leaders, follower or followers, the relationship between the two, and usually that relationship is what we like to call influence now. Certainly in other contexts, it may be considered a power relationship, but some sort of influence that then results in outcomes. Something changes or something happens, something gets done because of that relationship. And this all occurs within a situation or a context. So those are very interesting components of leadership that can modify the emphasis or what comes out of what we call effective leadership. So if you look at the different theories of leadership over time, you can see that there are many, many theories of leadership. So it just goes to show you that we haven't got a single generalized theory. And one of the earliest theories of leadership comes from the great man theory, sort of in the early 19th century, where the idea was a leader was someone who was born and not made, and someone who was designated as such, gifted as such from the gods. They have, certain innate superlative qualities that make them leaders. And as time went on, this got modified into different variations of that. What got left behind was the idea that you were born or designated by, gods or whatnot to be a leader, into more like you need to have certain skills or traits or behaviors that then make you become a leader. They, under the trait theory, certain special traits, certain skills, behavior. Over time, though, interestingly enough, in the 50s and 60s, the shift started to go from being mostly on what the leader is and their qualities, into the situation, looking at the situation. So successful leadership is thought now to actually not be specifically based on innate qualities or specific qualities of a leader, but on the match between their abilities and the situation. So contingency theory, situational theory, and that sort of brings up some of the things that some of you have pointed out in your definitions. So the situation creates the leader is sort of the thrust of these theories. And into the 60s and 70s, then it sort of shifted into relationships and the idea that effective leadership also depends on how well you mobilize and are able to relate to your followers, the relationship. So you can summarize it as leaders lead because they're liked. The followers willingly follow them. Over the years, we've got a shift towards transformational leadership in the 80s, which is still now one of the most influential theories of leadership. So the idea that leaders are inspirational, they empower their followers to achieve their best, and that's how they become the most effective, is the degree to which they can, with their vision, inspire followers to follow them and leave behind their individual interests to follow a common vision. Authentic leadership also focusing on the integrity, genuineness, relational transparency, a leader who's walking the talk and who's leading by example. So you can see there's a shift towards the situation and finally in the followers and the relationships. And then with servant leadership, it's really focusing on the followers. So effective leaders are those when they're doing servant-led leadership are the ones who it's measured by how well they serve their followers. So to lead is to serve. So you can see that there's many frameworks, and I'm just touching on a few basic ones, but there are many theories of leadership that have been constructed over the years.
So one question before we move on, there's a question from the crowd, and so there's one reflection that might be a little bit more rhetorical, but Rune has asked, who determines who is a good leader? So that's, I think, a really good question for us to ponder. Where would autocratic leadership fit in? Right, so the command central is kind of like when things are really going badly. As you know, as a clinician who does acute care, sometimes, Dr. Wong, like obviously when things are really hitting the fan, sometimes someone's got to step up, and sometimes you have to use that skill set. It probably does belong, but it's probably not a big theory. That's just like the more chaotic a situation is, you probably need to think about what that autocratic kind of command and conquer kind of strategy might need to be. But it's probably not in a theory-based way. It's just kind of what people end up doing. Something to think about and ponder.
Yeah, and that's the thing about these theories. It's it's all academic, and it's a way of making sense of like people think about what is it that makes effective leadership. So these put it into boxes, but you're very right. Real life actually doesn't specifically say that transformational leadership is all the time going to be effective in all circumstances. So when you have a crisis situation, you're going to need to take a more autocratic, a more sort of take charge position. And in fact, there's been a recent article that says, in a crisis, we don't need vision. We need, we need direction. So I think when you think about all these theories and what does it mean in real life, I think at the center of it points to the first question I asked, which is leaders take charge. So I think the bottom line with effective leadership is actually the adaptability and the awareness of knowing when you need to, as we talked about, lead from the front or lead from behind or match yourself to the situation. So that is actually true mark of a skillful leader, that they're not boxed into one leadership style. They may have a predominant approach that works for that particular context, but when the context changes, they're able to recognize that and adapt. So I think that is an important trait to have. So,
and I think that's probably what Manuela is talking about. Like sometimes you see inadequacies in leadership, and maybe that comes from less the person, but more the context has shifted so drastically that maybe the skills that they have don't match anymore the context.
exactly.
And that's really hard to come by, to realize that at some point you might need more expertise. I think we've seen that with a lot of our world leaders, right? Most of them did not go up into politics to handle a pandemic. And
Yes.
some people have shifted really well. And you're going to go over this a little bit, I think.
Yes, yeah, really great points. So when you look at, let's say, situational or contingency theory, a great example of that is historically is Churchill. So he was viewed as a fantastic leader, the crisis during the war. But when went back to normal sort of day-to-day life, he was not as successful as a leader during peacetime as he was. So the crisis creates the leader, or the situation may create the leader. So that's very interesting to look at contingency theory from that perspective. Yeah, and so the problem is when a leader has a specific rigid style and feels that that can be done in all circumstances, that's when potentially that can be a problem. I'm going to give you my bias as to what resonates with me. Leadership is about making a difference. It's using your agency to bring about change. So that's what one of the definitions that I could relate to. You'll see also in your definitions, it sort of spans that spectrum between definitions that are more leader focused and more sort of driven by the leader, power, that sort of thing, and going more into context and into follower. Your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, and become more your leader. So it's not about you, it's about enabling others. Leadership is about service to others. The greatness of a leader is measured by the achievements of the led. So some people, myself included, is very much believes in this form of leadership. And in fact, there is a theory that is followership. That followership is actually a form of leadership. So I just wanted to play this video on the importance of followership.
And so at this point, Dr. Wong takes us through a video that is originally part of a TED Talk that talks about followership. We've linked this video down below so you can watch this on your own from the original source. When you're done watching that video, you can return to this video as well to continue this do-it-yourself module.
So the long and short of all of this is that leadership premise 5, there are many ways to lead. And you can see that in the literature, there's no specific agreement on a general theory of leadership. There's many ways to lead. Leadership takes many forms, and you can see that also from the responses that we have from all of you as well. There's many ways, and you can see certainly the many faces of leadership, each with their different styles. So next we're going to shift to what are the components of effective leadership and see what is effective leadership, who gets to be recognized as a leader. All right, it's definition by your followers, right? So I'd like you to put in your chat box, what qualities do you look for in an effective leader? So think of a leader that you really admire, and it doesn't have to be a designated leader. It could be a role model. It could be your mom. If you can put in the chat box 1 or 2 characteristics that you look for in an effective leader.
So at this point in the workshop, Dr. Wong asks all the participants to put their concepts of what makes a great leader into the chat box, which we then aggregated into a word cloud. And we're about to discuss what the key words are in the word cloud generated by this group. What I would like you to do is think about your own words and then compare to what the group has created.
Okay, you can keep that so we don't erase it. We'll refer to it later on. But communicator comes out really strongly. Interesting. Humility, vision, integrity. Okay, good. Good.
Good. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, super. Okay, so keep all this in mind because I'll be referring to this word cloud. Okay.
All right. So we're gonna go back.
We've got patient, inspiration. We've got all kinds of listener, all kinds of things have come up. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
That's great. There you go.
Okay. So why do followers follow? So the literature does point to 5 areas as to why followers follow. So that's refers back to the question number 2 on our poll. Is it all about ability? So I'm telling you no, it's other things too. So I'm going to look at each of these different components that's in the literature. One of the components is the leader's vision, their why, and whether they're able to communicate that vision and capture the imagination of the followers that they're willing to follow the leader based on their vision. So vision is one component of why followers might want to follow a leader. Their traits, qualities, their skills, abilities, their behavior, and finally, the degree to which they can exert either power or influence. So let's look at each of those components separately. Vision. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Simon Sinek, but he gave one of the most popular TED Talks that is called How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Take Action. And the basic core message of that TED Talk is that leaders know their why. They know their purpose. They know why they're doing what they're doing. And all their actions reflect their why, their purpose, their vision. The actual TED Talk is 15 minutes. So this is not a TED Talk. This is just sort of like a summary compilation.
Yeah. And so at this point, Dr. Wong invites the group to watch a short video that she has selected around exactly this topic of how to start with why. And so you can take a look at that video separately from the original source and then return back to this video when you're done.
Yeah, so start with why, and that's his book. Okay, so next thing, qualities or traits of effective leaders. So Kouzes and Posner, who I referenced earlier on, this massive study in which international study over many years, in which they essentially asked the same simple question that I asked you, which is, what qualities do you most look for in leaders? Someone whom you would willingly follow. And the consistent 4 characteristics they came up with was honesty, integrity, competence, someone who's inspiring, and someone who has vision, forward-looking. And all 4 of these components, they basically say make up the whole premise or the whole idea of credibility. And they felt that credibility is the foundation of leadership. And these were the 4 components. So I found it interesting to see our poll. We did get some of those. So I think interesting communication did not come up in here, but it came up very strongly in our word cloud. Let's compare. So honesty, competence, inspiring. So vision certainly is there, humility and integrity, yes. So we got at least 3 of the 4. Communicator comes out really strong. That's really good. Interesting. And we'll talk about that.
Communication right now during the pandemic has been so important for leaders that I think that's probably come up as a
top of mind, yeah.
thing. Yeah.
But it actually is also important. Yeah, I'll be referring to that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine if you're honest and competent and inspiring and forward, and you keep it all to yourself. It's not going to be
exactly. It's just going to stay with you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so what other personality traits matter? Do other ones matter? Yes. In fact, the big 5 personality traits have been positively correlated in many studies with what is perceived as leadership effectiveness. So what are the big 5 personality components? Openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So neuroticism is kind of an old word. I guess it fits in with the OCEAN sort of acronym, but it's the lack of neuroticism. So neuroticism really refers to emotional stability. Emotional stability. So overall, interestingly enough, a fairly big meta-analysis recently, 2019, looked at all these and found that conscientiousness was the biggest predictor of workplace success, and by implication, leadership success. However, the effect of conscientiousness is attenuated as the work complexity increases. So it works really well in more simple sort of workplace settings, where the outputs are fairly straightforward. The idea of conscientiousness as being a big predictor of success becomes less and more attenuated the bigger the work complexity is. So that's interesting. It only gets you so far in certain contexts. What about being extroverted? So the idea of prototypical extrovert is someone who's talkative, outgoing, prefers to take charge, seeking out new experiences, risk-taking, someone who really likes to be around others. And introverts are more quiet, emotionally more reserved, harder to get to know. So those are kind of stereotypes. Interestingly, and perhaps sadly for introverts, they have studied and extroverts have been, on the whole, more likely to be perceived. So that's the big word, perceived by others as leaders. And again, another, by the same author, Wilmot, did another a huge meta-analysis and found that they do have a slight advantage over introverts. 4 areas: motivation, emotional aspects of work, interpersonal aspects, and performance-related measures. They have a little bit more of an advantage over introverts with regard to that. But the problem is with these studies, and the authors also mention it, it really is problematic to just give a blanket statement because most of us are not pure introverts or extroverts. We have a combination of both. Extroversion only gets you so far. Without the accompanying skills and competence, you may be, really flashy and charismatic at the beginning, but over time, when the skills and the competences are needed, it only carries you so far. The other thing that also moderates the effect of extroversion is context. So certain contexts, extroversion actually is very disadvantageous. And they found that if you're working in organizations or contexts where the hierarchy is relatively flat and your followers are fairly autonomous, such as in a university setting, it only gets you so far. And in fact, extroverted take charge may not do as well, and it may do worse in that situation. Whereas introverts who are more willing to listen, be open to other ideas, who are more able to deal with conflicts, actually do much better in those situations. Also culture. Certainly the North American culture really values and promotes the extroversion as leaders, whereas other countries culturally may find that actually really negative and prefer the more quiet, understated type of leadership. Follower characteristics type of work, and whether your extroversion is compatible with the type of work and culture. So there are a lot of moderators. So introverts, don't worry. There's still a place for you, but this is an interesting area of study, and certainly there's been lots and lots of examples of very successful and effective introverted leaders. People like Bill Gates, Mother Teresa, and Gandhi, and so on. Skills of effective leaders. So that's another area. We talked about skills. So effective leaders have been shown that they need a great deal of emotional intelligence, so self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, social skills. And that is an important skill of effective leaders. So the ability to really understand themselves and others and the impact that they have on others, and to be able to modify their behavior. Adaptability is really an important skill. And communication are key, as Teresa mentioned, especially in crisis situations. And in fact, some authors would go quite as far to say that if you cannot communicate, you cannot lead. So, and it's reflected in your answers here. Communication is a key requisite. I sort of like this. I like this quote: every time you have to speak, you're actually auditioning for leadership. Words are so important, the way you say them, and being aware of the impact. The next area is behavior, and the most effective leaders not only focus on their skills and their abilities, but they actually pay attention to the needs of their followers. That's so important, and especially during a crisis, they really understand what their followers need, and they meet their followers' needs. 4 areas that followers really need from their leaders. They need to trust their leaders. They need honesty, integrity, and respect, and that's also shown in the characteristics of leaders from Kouzes and Posner's research, and also actually from your poll. Compassion. Followers need to know you care about them as individuals, and that you're not just trying to get the work done, but you actually care about them and care about their development, care about their stability and their welfare. So stability. Followers need to know that the leaders are there for them, that they feel secure, guided, and supported, that the leader is stable, emotionally stable themselves as well. Nothing worse than to work in an organization that you don't know walking in, what mood this person's going to be in and what direction you're going to go in. It's just volatile. So that's one of the worst things. And hope. That leader needs to project a sense of hope, optimism, and positivity. Okay, finally, we talk about power. This is a classic paper by French and Raven, and they talk about the 5 sources of power. Of course, we don't like the word power, but in fact, power, if it's done, certainly can relate to some of those. We like to talk about influence, but certainly I think the way they've described the different sources of power, it is truly power. So a leader has certain areas that they can leverage to cause followers to follow them. So one of them is coercive power, and certainly this is in despotic type of environments or organizations where the leader has the ability to exert, punish, and do nasty things to people who do not follow what they want. Okay, so that's one source of potential power. Another source of power that the leader can potentially draw from, depending on the circumstances, is their ability to reward. So they may draw followers because they can actually reward them. They can give them money to follow what they want and so on. So they may exert their influence that way by their degree to which they're able to reward people. Then there's what they call legitimate power. So a leader may attract followers just because they have the title. The title has, bestowed upon them all these different avenues of influence that without the title they would not necessarily have. So the first three are examples of position power. So you draw your power from position, not necessarily because of any intrinsic abilities of your own. Fourth and fifth are interesting because referent power refers to your likability. People follow you because they like you, they believe in you, and so on. So, even if you didn't have a designated title, you could use your abilities of referent power to influence people. And finally, expert power. You are a source of high influence because you are an expert in this particular area. And we see this very much in healthcare, that experts are a great degree of recognition and respect. And so so you may not even have a title, and it could be the quietest person in the room, but if that person has a lot of expert power, they wield a lot of influence. So next time you're sitting in a meeting, think of who gets heard, the power they're actually exerting. So those are, 5 sources of power influence. Does gender matter? Yes. So we talked about other aspects, and so so gender is certainly matters in leadership. You can call gender a construct in determining whether you're recognized as a leader. And there's many barriers for women in leadership that have, become very much highlighted recently, but they've always been there. So certainly bias, societal bias, just the automatic bias that we have leaders as being stereotypically male. This impacts on self-concepts of women. A lot of things that are valued as leaders really come from very much a male model. So certainly that undermines confidence, risk-taking, and sort of the self-concept of what one needs to be a leader may negatively impact on women who may have a different perspective or approach to leadership. So that may be a barrier. Lack of supports, some recognition of one's leadership abilities at the workplace, institutional. The whole idea of role congruity hypothesis, which means that women have to, leaders have to be liked. They have to combine the stereotypes of likability and feminine qualities in addition to what they call more agentic male leadership qualities. So in order to be viewed as being capable as a leader, they need to combine both, whereas male leaders don't have to do that. They can just be, who they are. And finally, there's certainly literature that states that there's no difference in abilities compared to men's abilities in their leadership abilities, but how they're viewed or judged, there's a significant difference. This summary sort of summarizes all the leaky pipeline. So specifically, in academic medicine, that 50% of the medical school applicants and graduates are female, and yet the proportion of those who end up getting into leadership progressively proportionately goes down as the level of leadership goes up. However, the tide seems to be turning, and this is a little headline from Forbes that has what countries with the best coronavirus responses have in common, women leaders. So it certainly has highlighted, this pandemic has certainly highlighted the skills of women leaders. This came from Twitter, certainly highlighting Jacinta Ardern of New Zealand, her success. And certainly Canada's Dr. Bonnie Henry of the BC also won strong accolades. So I think the tide is shifting, and it would be really fascinating actually, because neither one of them fit that sort of prototype extroverted, loud, take charge type of leadership. In fact, their leadership may be considered more authentic leadership. So it'll be really interesting to look at their success and do case studies on them. Just talking about, we are in a crisis, and this is an interesting time, because we can actually watch and learn from leadership in a crisis in real time as we're going ahead. So certainly leadership in a crisis presents a different context to what we were talking about, that easy, comfortable, theory, all these situational theories or transformational visionary theories and all that. Leader in a crisis, it's really a subset of what leaders need to do. And it's certainly the idea of taking charge as opposed to sitting back. That's definitely is something that is expected. So what are the things that seem to be effective, or what makes a good leader in the idea during the pandemic? So John Quelch, there's a little video for John Quelch that summarizes, I think, some of the important points. So we can play this. 7 C's of leadership in a crisis: calm, confidence, communication, collaboration, community, compassion. And I really like that. He really emphasizes that, as well as cash. Well, so I think the first 6 are extremely, but certainly the 7th in the long term, depending on which role you take.
At this point, Dr. Wong plays another video about the 7 C's that she's just been talking about. So I invite you to watch that video separately and then return to this video when you're ready. So just pause us here and come back after you've looked at that other video.
So I want to end by, what are the aspects of effective leaders? And I think this is something that doesn't come up routinely, but I think it's so important that effective leaders know how to take care of their own well-being. They do not sacrifice themselves to the pursuit of the situation or to the work or the goals. They actually have to maintain themselves in order that they may fulfill their roles. So as Boyne and et al. Says, rigorous adherence to elementary rules of stress control is essential for leaders, especially in times of crisis. So just basic essentials: nutrition, sleep, social connections, exercise. And so it's the whole analogy of putting on your oxygen mask before helping others. And in this case, your PPE first before helping others. Yeah.
So at this point in the workshop, Dr. Wong invited everyone to take a 5-minute break, and so I'm going to suggest that you do the same. But if you're keener and you want to plow right through, what you can do is take 5 minutes to reflect on the worksheet that Dr. Wong has supplied to help you think through the next part of the activity that we're going to be going through.
Okay, everybody. So we're into the sort of last part of the workshop, and hopefully this is actually give you a chance to be able to connect with other people in this workshop, to reflect on yourself as a leader. We're going to just review the leadership premises that I had basically constructed this workshop around. So there's 5. The idea is that leadership begins with a desire to make a difference. Leadership is about knowing self. Leadership is about leading self. Leadership is about believing in self, and that leadership takes many forms. So we're going to take some time to really sort of dive into looking at yourself and knowing yourself. So I hope these next exercises will help you do a little bit of that reflecting. So just before we go, I just want to talk about a leadership approach that I find quite useful, and that's called the strengths-based leadership. So this is a book by Tom Rath and Barry Conchie, but they're actually focusing on the work of Donald Clifton, who originated this whole idea of strengths-based leadership. The basic premise of Donald Clifton looked around and looked at all these theories of leadership and ways of improving your leadership, and he realized that most of them really focused on knowing about your weaknesses and fixing them or doing something about them. But his premise was, if you spend your life trying to be good at everything, you'll never be great at everything. And so he took a different approach, which was focused on building your strengths rather than fixing your weaknesses. Be aware of your weaknesses, definitely. So don't ignore them. But really, he felt that your strengths are what makes you you, and that is what you're special at, and where you can really blossom. So cultivate those. Know your strengths and play to them. Understand where your weaknesses, not to ignore them, certainly work on them, but don't focus on them to the detriment of building up your strengths, but build talented teams who will, and find people who actually have strengths where you are weak, and use them and work within a team that you're able to balance each other. And the other important thing is to meet your followers' needs. So that's sort of the basis. And so they've come up with an inventory called Strengths Finder, and you can access that, and you have to pay for it. But that way you can find out some of your strengths. So I just wanted to point out to that as one way of gauging what your strengths are. So I have this worksheet for you. And leadership worksheet, and you can sort of use that to reflect on various aspects. So in that worksheet, I start off with asking you whether you're a leader, or whether you feel that you're a leader or not, and what are your strengths. I also give you a values exercise, so looking at what your strengths are, what your values are, and then using some of those reflections into the live tool, which then sort of distills them to you thinking, reflecting on how you can use all those aspects, what you love to do, what your purpose is, what your goals, what difference you want to make, what your inner strengths are, what your values, what environments, what contexts bring out the best in you. Just focus or think about how you can contribute to leadership in your specific certain way. Next, there's also a free character via Institute character survey that actually is sort of like the Strengths Finder that you have to pay for, but it's a different. So if people are interested in doing that, I can certainly send you the link. But I have a quick and easy way of doing it, which is just think of a peak moment where you're performing at your best, and what strengths were you showing from that. And as I mentioned, hopefully you can use that to sort of distill what difference you want to make, what leadership purpose. So we're going to put you in breakouts, and I'd like you to fill the sheets out by yourself for about 5 minutes. Just take as much time as you feel you need, and then take some time to share.
All right, so at this point, what Dr. Wong has me do is put everyone into breakout rooms of 2 or 3 people. They take the worksheet and first quietly reflect for about 5 minutes, and I will encourage you to do the same. So pause the video now, and then just take the time to think through all the different questions she's asked. Next, find a partner, and that could be literally your partner, your spouse, or someone at home. Could even be one of your kids. If you're in the work environment and you're replicating this, hopefully your facilitator has actually put together a team of people for you to reflect with. And so that's what my hope is, and you can take all the content that you have just reflected upon and share it with your team, hopefully in a psychologically safe place where you can discuss your personal strengths and where you want to go with them. This is a really, really useful activity. So I encourage you to stop, pause right now, and then return to the video when you're all done, and you can hear the reflections of the group. All right, welcome back, everyone.
Have to go.
I know, right? Like you probably started just having a great conversation.
But I am hoping for a little bit of a debrief and then a summary. Okay, so last part. So think about committing to one small leadership change. So I like this quote. I'm done with great things and big plans, great institutions and big success. I'm for those tiny, invisible, loving human forces that work from individual to individual, creeping through the crannies of the world like so many rootlets, or like the capillary oozing of water, which will rend the hardest monuments of pride. And I think a lot of us are a little bit nervous about taking on certain leadership roles and thinking that we have to make great grand gestures, and really small is powerful. So I think just the power of small. So anything that you do adds to the greater enterprise of leadership. So don't discount any of that. And so when I talk about what are you committing to, I'm talking about just one small step. So even if it means let's say, exerting your leadership by, when you're in committees, just piping up and being an ally to a member of your committee who is less heard, and committing to doing that to amplify their voices may be just a small leadership change. So I want to think about that. So maybe I'll give you a few minutes now for people to debrief on your thoughts about examining yourself for leadership, anything I've said in this workshop, what your commitment to, anything at all.
My name is Sylvia. So I have more of a question. One of my biggest challenges is actually, I think, communication. Know if it's about the listening or just trying to not impose necessarily my vision and try to get trying to get everyone else's vision and try to, when working as a group, come up with a group vision. Would you have any tips on that? I started reading on nonviolent communication, but would you have any practical tips or anything that you would suggest to enhance communication skills?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sylvia. So is the issue that you find that you're having difficulty expressing yourself or difficulty in being heard? What exactly do you mean?
I think it's a combination of factors. I guess getting my point across.
Well, I think certainly communication is certainly a skill that you can augment by taking workshops and courses or sessions on communication skills. But I think the idea is maybe look inside yourself and say, why is it that I'm finding it difficult? What are the sort of impediments or barriers that I'm finding? Is it because I don't actually volunteer my voice? Is it because I feel uncertain about what I'm saying? Are there ways in which I could, feel comfortable in expressing myself in ways that would be heard more clearly? Are you taking the initiatives? And are you actually expressing yourself? So sometimes it's just the idea of making a small commitment that if you're in a committee, is just to say, however fearful you may feel, it's just to make one statement and try to say it loudly or clearly, not necessarily loudly, but clearly express yourself. One of the things I had difficulty with when I started my position as Assistant Dean, Program for Faculty Development over 7 years ago, was I felt kind of uncomfortable introducing me by my own title. And so I made a commitment just to say, okay, I'm going to say my name and I'm going to say my title clearly and without apology. So I think that made a huge difference. I practiced that and it became natural. So I don't need to apologize. I'm here for a reason. My opinion counts. My views count. So, starting maybe with a mindset, and I'm not saying that that's the issue with you, but maybe digging deep as to what do you think is preventing you from feeling like you're being heard or you're expressing yourself might be one of the things I might suggest.
Thank you.
All right, and there's some resources at the Mac Faculty Development page where there's some resources that you can kind of view to see how people have been coaching others to listen better or communicate better. So definitely take a look at some of those resources as well, because it might continue your conversation.
Yeah, and communication is definitely a skill. It definitely is something that you can get better at with practice and would take, these extra information and opportunities.
I have a quick question. In your slides, you showed several different books. If you have to pick one, would you pick one for someone if you want to improve your communication skills, if you want to understand about yourself? I guess that's the main thing, like see where you are, where you want to go. And is there any of those resources that you feel it's
yeah, I can certainly give you a few.
Beginners?
Yeah, I can certainly give you a few. Kouzes and Posner is one book, but there's a number of others. There's something called From Good to Great, and also there's one called True North, which is again really understanding your values and moving forward. So what you might say, sort of more that kind of book. Yeah.
Hi there, it's Anne Malott here.
Hi.
I just want to thank you for this session. I found it incredibly helpful. And I mean, I've been around the block for a while now, and I'm actually, and really, really wish I had taken it quite some time ago. I
Oh
think it
my gosh.
would have helped me to understand myself and understand people with whom I work and maybe their motivations or, different styles a little bit more. And I really, really would encourage new faculty, new clinicians joining teams to take this course, because I think it is a wonderful launching point. And with those resources that you're willing to share, that list would be phenomenal. So thank
Oh,
you for
thank
taking
you.
the time to do this.
Oh,
Yeah,
of
I really
course.
appreciate it.
And thank you very much for your comments. It is Leadership 101, so it's just the start. It's just to get you stimulated. Start so, but yeah, that's why I do find this, as I say, a fascinating topic, because it's not only about leadership, a role, but it really is about life skills, and it is quite applicable to all areas of your life as well. So I appreciate your comments. I will finish off with some summary slides. Okay, so think about what little leadership change you might want to make. Think about your values. Think about your strengths. Where can you really dig deep and use those to really forge your path, your contribution to leadership? And as I say, just one small step, just a small thing is more than enough. You don't have to be this great big gestures. And I like this picture because it's stepping out into the ocean, the unknown. And sometimes, it just takes that, it's just stepping out, just doing one thing that you wouldn't have normally do. Either speak up a little bit more in forcing yourself to speak up a bit more in meetings or whatnot. So how do you get there? So believe you can. And when you oftentimes you sort of doubt yourself, but if other people's are actually seeing the strengths in you and they're telling you about them, believe them. Believe those who think you can. And all of us have ways that we can make a difference. So believe that you count, you can make a difference, and that you're worth listening to. Lead self. Know who you are, what your strengths are, your values, your purpose. And if you have this sense of passion and purpose and vision, everything actually follows, because all the decisions you make are based on those core values. Get skilled. So it's not just enough to have vision or purpose or knowing your strengths. Leadership there are skills, and we talked about abilities and skills, communication skills, empathy, emotional intelligence. So training, there's that training, but also mentoring and coaching. Find a leader that you admire, or somebody that you really is a role model, who is role modeling those areas. And I forgot to mention that actually with regard to communication. How do you get skilled? It's not just from learning from formal sessions, but learning from others. Those are good communicators. What is it? Have a coffee with them, have a chat with them, get connected. Relationships are key, really important. You don't lead in isolation. You actually lead in a community. So make sure you make use of your peer supports and challenge yourself. Start with one small change. So again, to summarize, you've seen these 5 premises that I've based my workshop on. A desire to make a difference, just something you want to do. Knowing self, leading self, believing in self, and that there's so many different ways that leadership, so many forms that leadership can take. There's no one way, and the whole idea of taking charge and moving forward is good for certain circumstances and certain personalities. But if that's not your leadership style, don't worry about changing yourself to do that. You may be effective leading in other ways, or even in leading from behind as opposed to leading from front. And as I've mentioned, there are things that make leaders effective, and certainly honesty, competence, inspirational, compassionate, self-aware, visionary. Those are some of the components of effective leadership. And ultimately, it's about your ability to align yourself, your purpose, and others to collectively work towards positive change. And it takes just one step. And I want to leave you with this. It's kind of a variation on Gandhi's phrase. If you don't think you can lead the change, then be the change you want to see in the world. And in fact, by being the change, you're actually leading the change. So being is enough. So thank you very much again. Really appreciate all of you, all your input and participation, and being and sharing today with us as we go through this exploration of leadership and exploring yourself as well.